Good evening. You are listening to Right on Campus, the UW-Eau Claire College Republican podcast. Good evening. You're listening to Right on Campus, the UWEC College Republicans podcast. As always, I'm Ryan, the vice chair of UWEC College Republicans, and I'm here joined with my co-host and working partner, Tatiana, the chair of UWEC College Republicans. We have a very fun episode for you tonight. Tonight we'll be discussing the confusing nature around the Syrian civil war, what's really going on there, and where does it go from here, as well as the Selective Service military draft. First, we'd like to outline some housekeeping items, just so you all know what to expect as we enter the winter break season. We're going to continue to have weekly episodes, but we may have some more special guests and might be looking to switch the format just for a few weeks. But then we will return in February, and the podcast will go on business as usual. With all that being said, let's get into tonight's topics. So, the first is the resurgence or outbreak of the Syrian civil war.
Yes.
So, I just wanted to start by talking about what exactly is the Syrian civil war for those who maybe don't know. So, the Syrian civil war is characterized as the most deadliest conflict of the 21st century. The Syrian civil war has resulted in over 580,000 deaths.
Wow.
Yeah, with some estimates reaching as high as just over 600,000. So the conflict has caused one of the worst humanitarian crises in the modern history. I think maybe we all know about this with the 13.3 million people who have been displaced, and of that 6.6 million were refugees, and they entered Europe and America. This was all pre-Trump 2016. Yep. This was a hot-button topic in 2016. But this war has just completely devastated Syria and Syria's infrastructure and has an estimated $226 billion economic loss only from 2011 to 2017.
Oh, my goodness. Wow.
Yeah. So how did this start? So Bashar al-Assad is was the dictator
Yes.
in Syria, and he kind of came to power through his father, who was a Ba'athist. It's Ba'athist, Shia Muslim. And they kind of, in Syria, they had this, the Assad regime had this, think of it as, the easiest way to think about it is it's a fascist regime. It's a fascist regime in Syria. And there were a lot of complaints about this in 2011. So in the mid 2000s, there was this whole uprising throughout all of North Africa and the Middle East called the Arab Spring. And so the Arab Spring was just like they were, young people rising up from countries like Tunisia to Libya to Afghanistan. Even Iran had a little bit, and Syria was one of the main ones. So the protests started in Dara. They were sparked by the arrest and then torture of 15 teenagers who painted anti-government graffiti and were a part of this Arab Spring uprising. The initial protests were calling for democratic reform. They wanted to be a democratic Syria. That was the goal, and that's actually why the Obama administration supported them so heavily. And the governments of Syria then violently cracked down against these protesters.
Oh, yeah. This is where we started to get chemical warfare.
Yeah, tear gas, war crimes and stuff against their own citizens. And that was a lot of the justification for U.S. intervention in Syria. Excuse me. So then the protests quickly spread to other cities, including Damascus, Homs, Aleppo, and then nationwide, unrest. So the Syrian government's response to these protests was to deploy their security forces to suppress the protests using tear gas, water cannons, and then live ammunition. They just opened fire into these protesters.
People think our police are bad.
Yeah, seriously. And the violent crackdown led to the formation of these opposition groups. So the first was called the Free Syrian Army, and this was formed by defectors of the Syrian military. So these are Assad loyalists who then watched Assad go after the protesters and the Syrian people, and they decided that they'd had enough, and they wanted to defect and then go after the Assad regime with the goal of overthrowing the Assad regime. This actually didn't last all that long. They pretty quickly devolved into different factions. This is why Syria is kind of known as like one of the most deadly and war-torn countries in the world, is because there's all these different factions. And so this Free Syrian Army kind of devolved into a couple Islamist factions.
Yeah.
Jabhat al-Nusra, geez, this is going to be a tough podcast, and other quote-unquote secular groups like the Syrian Democratic Forces all emerged and were vying for power against Assad.
Yeah.
By mid-2012, the major cities, Damascus and Aleppo, they became huge battlegrounds with intense fighting between government forces and then these various rebel groups. The conflict saw the involvement of many foreign extremists who wanted to take advantage of the war-torn Syria.
And this is where we got ISIS.
And
actually, ISIS is one of my first introductions to politics in
Really?
the political realm. I remember sitting on the couch in my living room. My mom had on like Bill O'Reilly, and I would watch.
Bill was the go.
Did you
back
watch
in the day.
the Waters World special episodes? You
No.
know, where Jesse Waters would go out into the streets and he'd ask people like questions about basic facts, like the first man on the street type stuff.
Oh, okay, yeah. No, I
And
never saw.
So
those.
I would watch he would have a short segment like within O'Reilly's episodes and stuff, and so I would
Bill was
watch just
something.
for that. And then, he'd go into the news and whatnot. And I remember learning about ISIS. And I actually remember having nightmares about them.
Really?
Because that was like
Yeah.
my first introduction to real life stuff that
Yeah,
happens.
right. Well, and ISIS was, we kind of got fear-mongered by, the media
Yeah.
who told us that they were going to commit another 9/11.
Yeah.
And it was still, 2012, that's only 11
Yeah.
years after 9/11.
True.
Which is not a long time.
No.
But yeah, so ISIS is the Islamic State in Iraq and Syria. And so they were mainly based out of Iraq, and then they bled into northern Syria when this Syrian civil war broke out. So from 2015 to 2017, this is where we saw kind of an escalation and then a calming down of the Syrian civil war. So the IRGC, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, was sent in to fight the anti-Assad forces on the ground. And then the Russians stepped in and contributed air power and dominated the Syrian skies during this period from 2015 to 2017. Both Russia and Iran were considered to be the guarantors of Assad being able to stay in power. And it was not looking good for him.
Always kind of backed him.
It was not looking good for him at all. And with Russia and Iran stepping in, mainly Russia stepping in, he was able to kind of turn this into a stalemate and stay in power. So we kind of are going to talk about this later, but with Russia and Iran being kind of occupied right now, this allowed for a group called HTS to make this miracle push from the Idlib province to Aleppo all the way to Damascus.
And it was fast.
I mean, it was like 3 weeks.
Yeah.
I remember telling my girlfriend Rachel, she's been on one of the podcasts. I was like, looking at Twitter one night. I'm like, oh my goodness, like there's fighting in Aleppo. I'm like, Rachel, I don't know if we've ever talked about this because it hasn't been in the news for a long time, but Syria's having this civil war and this is being started up again. This is crazy. So what exactly is HTS? This is kind of a question everybody's having because they kind of came out of nowhere.
Mm-hmm. And actually there's a lot of controversy related to it from what I've seen because they kind of are a rebel offshoot of the terrorist group Al-Qaeda.
Right.
But there's many people who are denying that.
Right.
And are saying that they're not related at all.
Right.
And so there's a little bit of controversy there.
No, absolutely. So HTS, otherwise known as Hay'at Tahrir al-Sham, is a Sunni Islamist political organization involved in northern Syria, in the Idlib province. It formed on the 28th of January 2017 as a merger between several other factions. Bear with me. The Jaish al-Ahrar, the Jabhat Fa'i al-Shaim, or the JFS, and the Ansar al-Dan Front. The Sunni Islamist rebel group, so the HTS, launched a surprise offensive and has now taken control of the entire country, just about.
Wow.
There's like Kurdish, there's
Yep.
like a Kurdish ethnic group in the north, and so they control the north still. But
Yeah.
everything that was controlled by rebels and Assad is now under control of HTS. So we need to do some defining.
Yeah.
What is Islamist? This is a word that kind of gets thrown around a lot. So Islamist or Islamism refers to the political ideologies that seek to implement Islamic, otherwise known Islamic law, otherwise known as Sharia law, and the principles of governance and its principles of governance in society.
And even within that, there's the two types of Islam too, which I think is important to look
It's
at.
very important.
There's the Sunni Islam, and then there's the
Shia. Yeah.
And I believe Shia is the more extreme Islamic practices, but both can get pretty extreme from what I've seen.
Oh, definitely. So, yeah, this is good to talk about. So it's going to shake up the entire balance of power in the Middle East because of this. So the Sunni Muslims, they have the capacity to be very extreme. It's called Wahhabism. It came out of Saudi Arabia. So this Wahhabist was this guy, who, cleric or whatever. He came up with these ideas of how to govern.
Yeah.
In accordance with Sunni Islam, and they have informed groups like ISIS and Al Qaeda.
Yep.
And so those groups obviously are extraordinarily extreme. But when you look at a country like Saudi Arabia, this is where it came from. They're Sunni, they are a royal monarchy, and sure they have their own issues there, but for the most part, they're very diplomatic and they're not radical, and they are tolerant of religious and ethnic minorities in their country. So with all of this being said, we're kind of talking about HTS. There's this guy who now is effectively in control of all of Syria.
Yeah.
His name is Abu Muhammad al-Julani. He is also known as the Emir of the HTS and has been since 2017. And he's now been the de facto leader of Syria since December 8th.
Which was 3 days ago.
Yeah, it was just 3 days ago from when we're recording this. And he is the former emir meaning the leader in Islam. He's a former emir of Al Qaeda in Syria, also known as the Al Nasser Front.
And so this is where the tie comes in of how we know that HTS is connected, or has this at least origin from Al Qaeda.
From Al Qaeda, yeah.
And I think it's important to mention that their current leader was a leader in Al Qaeda.
Yeah, he was the leader of Al Qaeda in Syria.
Yes, exactly.
And also to mention that I don't have a date on this, but reports have confirmed that when they got their forces thinned down to like 10,000, I think, over the last few years, the Assad regime has been in complete control. Assad literally had like 300,000 military personnel.
Yeah.
And so this al-Julani, the HTS leader, worked very close with Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, the leader of ISIL, or the Islamic State in Iraq and Levant. This is the famous one that you remember Trump came out and he was like, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi died like a dog. He was shaking and alone in a cave.
Oh my gosh.
So that's just a little context for anybody who wants to laugh. So this rebel group HTS has now captured Damascus. So HTS launched this surprise offensive from the Idlib province, which is in northern Syria. and they first attacked Aleppo. And so Aleppo is
Yep.
the second largest city in Syria, and they actually had to go north first. So Idlib province is a little northeast, or northwest rather. And they had to go up into Aleppo, and they controlled Aleppo, and then it was straight down. And they went
Yep.
straight through Hama, then Homs, then to Damascus in a matter of like 3 weeks.
Yeah. And a majority of it just happened within a couple days.
Yeah.
Like once they got
right.
started, it's kind of just exponentially sped up.
And so, another weird thing about this whole situation is HTS basically faced no resistance
Yeah.
from the Assad
and that's
regime.
why they were able to do it so quickly. They got to Damascus and it was kind of like,
Right.
okay, here we go.
I just said, like, Assad had, some people are saying he has 350,000. Well, let's be on the safe side, say he has 300,000 military personnel. The guy has hardware. He has jets, tanks, armored vehicles, chemical weapons, bombs. He's got everything that you would need to take care of 15,000 jihadists.
Exactly.
And
he's done it in the past.
He's done it in the past. Like, and so what happened here?
Well, and then he fled to Russia.
Right.
And really, Russia, we were just talking about Russia and Iran being occupied.
Yeah.
And really the only help that Russia contributed was they gave him asylum.
They got him they got him out of there. They airlifted him. Have you heard that some reports are trying to say that Assad was out of country weeks before they reported that he was? Yeah.
Interesting.
And so that's kind of raising these questions is like, a lot of people want to believe more on the left that this was some Superman, effort by HTS that just jammed through all these cities.
Oh, yeah.
I don't believe it for a second. Obviously something happened here.
Yep.
And I don't know. I have a question prepared. That's just, was this a battle or was this a coup?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Like, did somebody in the Syrian military or did a majority of the Syrian military officers, or have they just had enough with Assad and they said, we're not going to defend you?
Well, and what's interesting is like, what was their breaking point? Because
Right.
in 2011, we had a clear, we were able to identify who the victims were. And,
Right.
There was a very clear set, point that kind of set everything into motion.
Right.
But here, we don't really know what kind of started it all, other than just over time there was buildup.
No, right. And yeah, like, I'm trying to think like, okay, so if the Russians and the Iranians got word from Bashar al-Assad that he's done and like his military won't fight for him and he's got to get out of country. Well, why would they defend him? Why would they send their own men in other than their own national security interest? It just wouldn't be beneficial for them to go and fight a war for a guy whose country doesn't even want him.
No, that's true. And looking at HTS, are they going to have a different relationship with Russia and Iran, do you think?
Definitely with Iran.
Okay.
And the reason being is what we talked about earlier.
So the differing Muslim groups.
Iran is Shiite,
Mm-hmm.
and this HTS is Sunni.
And there's some tension there.
There is a lot of tension there. So the breakdown of the Middle East right now is the Sunni countries. This is just any country in the Middle East that has a relatively positive relationship with the West, you can kind of bet that they're Sunni.
Yep.
Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, UAE. These are countries who are Bahrain. These are Western supporting Sunni countries.
Yeah.
The Shiite countries are Iran, and then I'm drawing a blank here. Iraq,
Okay.
Iraq, and then Bashar al-Assad, the Assad regime in Syria was Shia. So now the reason why this is going to be really important, and this actually helps the U.S. and Israel a ton, is because the Assad regime allowed, because they were Shiite, they had friendly relations with the Iranians, and so they allowed the Iranians, who also control most of Iraq, to just roll the supply lines straight from Iran, through Iraq, through Syria, and into South Lebanon, supplying Hezbollah. And now that a Sunni Islamist group controls Syria, the road through Damascus and the road to Lebanon is closed, and it most likely will be closed. So what just happened, a lot of people think, is that Iran just got hit really hard by all this
Yeah.
news. They are not going to be able to supply Hezbollah in the north of Israel, or in southern Lebanon and Israel's northern front, with the weapons that
Yeah.
they have been. And so this is big news for the Israelis specifically. The U.S., of course, because we have interest in their success. But so yeah, this is just a total shakeup.
Yeah. So then looking, a little bit deeper into the whole Russia and Iran stuff, we know that Russia and Iran, like mentioned before, are kind of the key allies in the Assad regime.
Yeah.
And we know they didn't really intervene, kind of like we just touched on. And, kind of wondering why. I mean, I think a good part of it has to do with Russia's been pretty occupied with Ukraine. So that's kind of been their main focus right now. And then Iran's pretty occupied with the whole Israel-Gaza stuff.
Right.
And so for both of those countries, they're diverting their resources and their time, and kind of all their attention to their own conflicts that they're dealing with. And so this kind of opened the door for HTS to have a chance to
blitz.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. Yeah. So I think we can briefly cover Assad. There's not totally a point in talking about Assad much now that he's disposed and an optometrist in Russia. I heard he's working on eyes. Yeah, he used to do that or something before he was the dictator.
Hitting them with tear gas.
That was incredible. Wow. Funniest joke of the night. So that was great. Bashar al-Assad's regime was characterized by widespread human rights violations. So he extrajudicial killings, killed people without trials, used chemical weapons.
Yeah, and now that some of these prisons are being, people are being released and stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, they're finding bodies on top of bodies.
Yeah, right.
And,
right.
and I think another interesting thing to talk about with all this is Syria is known for having very strict laws, and a lot of Muslim countries are like this regarding women. And there's a lot of Muslim women that are saying that this is very hopeful now. And I'm interested to see how that shakes out, because it's not like they're replacing...
they're literally being replaced by Al-Qaeda. Like good luck.
And they talk a lot about a lot of women in Muslim countries are raped. Yeah. And it's the sad reality. Yeah. And a lot of it does have to do with the way that their religious beliefs value women and differences in that. Yeah. And... there's obviously more extremes version of the religion than, a lot of people we see here in America that practice Islam. Yeah. But I'm interested to see, because it is a very similar religion taking over, if any of that really changes. Right.
So just to cover your point, because I make the joke, like, oh, they're replacing him with Al-Qaeda, which, yeah, kind of. But the truth is if I go back to the what were they? They were called the Al-Nusra Front, which was directly affiliated with Al-Qaeda. Okay. If you label yourself as Al-Qaeda, you will get struck by American airstrikes. Yep. No matter where you are. Yep. If you are ISIS, if you are Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, we're going to hit your compound, and then we're going to send dogs into the cave after you. That's because we label these groups and these people as top terrorists and on U.S. terror watch list.
Because they have committed atrocities.
Because they've committed atrocities, and they explicitly say that they want to kill Americans, and they want to destroy America.
Celebrate it,
the destruction of the West. Well, this al-Jilani, this new leader of HTS, was smart enough to rebrand. And they rebranded to this group, and now they have specifically been saying that they are looking to prioritize human rights and the rights of the minorities in these countries. And they're going to establish a government based on Islamic principles, but they want to be more empathetic to the religious and ethnic minorities in Syria, which there are a lot of them. Yes. Syria is quite like the way that America is. It has a lot of different ethnic groups, and but with similar but competing religions.
Well, and actually, I'm glad you brought that up because Jolani has even said that, like, one of the quotes I found from him was, "In future Syria, we believe that diversity is our strength, not a weakness."
Okay, all I got to say about that is he is just begging. He's just begging us not to nail him. Like, that's got to be what this is.
Doesn't that sound familiar?
Yeah. No,
like that is like...
Come on.
I'm pretty sure our university has told us that, like, every day.
No, yeah. I mean, I'm hopeful. Let's hope that he is pragmatic enough to understand that if, you make an enemy out of the West, especially in this climate right now in the Middle East, like, if he were to go out tomorrow and say that they're going to create a Sunni caliphate in Syria and they're going to hit Israel, and then they're going to supply Yemen with the Houthis in Yemen with missiles so they can hit the shipping, the U.S. would destroy them.
Oh,
I mean, and not necessarily that I would be totally supportive of, like, knock them off the planet, but it doesn't matter. Trump and Biden and Obama and Bush all used airstrikes against these people.
Yeah.
It's just going to continue whether we like it or not. And so if they labeled themselves as anti-West, they're putting a target on their back. And so I think it would be pragmatic and within this guy's interest if he can create a not necessarily pro-Western, if that's not what he wants to do, but not an anti-Western.
Yes, exactly.
Not come out and say that the U.S. and Israel are our enemies and we are pledging our lives to the destruction of the U.S. and Israel. Quite like the former leader of Al-Qaeda, Osama bin Laden.
Yep.
We got to talk about the responses to this because this matters a lot.
Yeah, let's look at what was Trump and then Biden's response to this. And I think, I think looking at Biden, current president, you would hope that he would have a response, and he did. Not sure if he's aware he had a response. But
he definitely doesn't know he wrote this.
But he expressed his support for the Syrian people, and he's pretty much said that it's like a moment of opportunity for the people who have been suffering in Syria, and they have a chance to build a better future.
Okay.
And then he also did come around and say, it's a moment of risk. There's some uncertainty. And we'll have to see what comes next. So he kind of just didn't say anything, which honestly is probably a smart move. Just kind of see what happens. And then he maintained military presence in that northern part of Syria where
ISIS fighters.
Yes.
Yeah.
Where they're trying to essentially keep ISIS at bay up there.
Yeah,
and we've had like 900 troops or so up there for a while.
Right.
And then on the flip side, Trump went right to Truth Social.
Classic.
And sent us a message in all caps. Once
From
again,
the
classic. And so he's got more of a interventionalist approach.
Yeah.
And he said, in any event, Syria is a mess, but is not our friend, and then all caps. And the United States should have nothing to do with it. This is not our fight. Let it play out. Do not get involved.
In any event, Syria is a mess. It's not our friend. And the United States should have nothing to do with it. This is not our fight. Let them play it out. Do not get involved. That's my impression. That's how I read it in my head.
Yes.
Yeah, it's also important to talk about how the U.S. and Israel have both been conducting a heavy air campaign.
Yeah, true.
In Syria to prevent whoever takes control of this country. Because, I mean, for all this talk we have about HTS, literally it could change tomorrow.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, tomorrow there could be a different group in charge.
So back, I started the beginning of the podcast talking about, ISIS is how I kind of learned about politics and world affairs.
Yeah.
And I remember one of the first things my mom taught me about it was the idea of a vacuum. And when you have somebody taken out in leadership, it instantly creates this vacuum. And somebody has to fill that.
Wow, your mom is like a visionary. She's like good job.
Yeah.
Good job, Mom. That was good. Yeah, so the U.S. is striking ISIS in northern Syria, trying to keep them at bay. Because ISIS is far stronger and has much larger name recognition and respect around the more radical sides of the Islamic world than HTS does.
Which both helps and hurts them.
Certainly.
So.
Certainly, yeah. I mean, the recruiting efforts are great because people, young Islamic men, love that stuff. But they're not going to be able to get Western help.
No.
So, and then Israel. So Israel has been targeting the Syrian chemical weapon facilities to prevent their use against their own civilians and then the neighboring civilians, and preventing whoever takes over control of Syria from controlling Bashar al-Assad's weaponry. Yeah.
Which kind of says a lot, I think, considering Israel's also trying to keep, the whole Palestine issue at bay and, trying to deal with that.
Yeah.
And in the meantime, Israel knows when to send in, the fighters anywhere. They keep an eye out.
Right. Well, and so there, if anybody knows a ton about Israel, there's just been this debate over their land. What should they control? Should they control the West Bank? Should they control Gaza? Should they control, South Lebanon, south of the Litani River? Then there's this area in southwestern Syria called the Golan Heights. So Israel controlled the Golan Heights during what was there war? 6-day war?
Yeah.
They took control of the Golan Heights, but then in order to gain peace, they ceded this ground. So think of this Golan Heights as a DMZ, like North and South Korea.
Okay,
it's kind of been like that for a long time. But now that the Assad regime is gone, Israel rolled the troops in and is now taken control of the Golan Heights. And then one more thing I have on here that I didn't mention is President Erdogan of Turkey has also said that he wants to set up a buffer zone in northern Syria. So we could see Turkish troops rolling into Syria as well within the next few months. And that is also important because in the first Trump administration, they did conduct operations. The Turks did, and they sent these troops in to keep the Kurdish forces at bay. This is a whole geopolitical topic we don't need to get into. Turkey doesn't want there to be an independent Kurdish state because it would cause uprisings in Turkey. They have a significant minority of Kurds in Turkey, and they don't want there to be, domestic instability.
That makes sense.
Trump famously told Erdogan, "Go ahead. I'm going to stay out of your way. I'll move my troops aside. We're not going to get involved in this. You do what you need to do. We're out." And so this could be Trump's message going forward. We don't know. We got to wait and see. All of this is breaking news.
I think it's important too that Trump's not, as much as this, sounds like he's addressing Biden here, I think he's also addressing Syria.
Oh, for sure.
And I think it's easy to overlook that. He is very much sending a message to, HTS and, kind of letting them know, like, we're going to stay out of your way. You don't have to worry about me right now.
Yeah.
And kind of just letting things play out. And, trying not to essentially walk into his presidency with them already upset with him.
Right. So how do you think that this is going to impact the world, but also global tensions in the region?
I think it'll be interesting to see what happens. And we've already seen, I know there's been already some little bit of immigration type stuff. But a lot of the immigration from, 2011 time period to Europe, I'm curious to see if we see migrants go back towards Syria. Like if, that.
Yeah.
Because
wouldn't that be great?
Well, the interesting part about the Islam culture, though, is like their land is very important to them and where they come from. And so it'd be interesting to see, do they practice what they preach, and are they going to go back there? Are they going to stay in Europe? Because we've seen a change in Europe itself, and a lot of these countries that have taken in these Muslim migrants. And so I don't know. I think that's one. Did
you see the video of the Irish guy? No. So Ireland took a ton of Syrian immigrants in, and they were all celebrating that Assad was disposed. And so this Irish, actually Irish guy, pulls up and he's like, "How, are you guys, now that Assad's gone, like, when are you going back?" And they're like, "Well, the economic conditions aren't right." It's like, oh, okay. Yeah, okay. So you're not going back. All right. Yeah. I don't know. I'm interested to see how this shakes out. I don't think I don't think we've nearly seen the end of this. This is not going to be peaceful.
Oh, no.
This is not going to be easy.
And there's no way that ISIS just sits aside and just lets.
Yeah, and Al-Qaeda.
Yeah,
and,
like.
Yeah, I don't know.
There's so many forces here that could.
Even
jump
Iran,
in.
it's like, how does Iran? I mean, that's the whole strategic, checkmate on Israel was Iran's ability to arm Hezbollah in the north. I mean, that was it. That was their only. Because now, it's like what? So if Israel and the U.S. and the West wanted to conduct a joint operation, say to take out Iranian nuclear facilities, which I think would be detrimental to the world, and I understand why people support it, but we cannot invite more action in this region. With that being said, what's stopping them? Because what was stopping them is the fact that Hezbollah had hundreds of thousands of intermediate range missiles right on their border.
Very true.
And so the fact that now they don't have a supply line, I mean, this is really interesting. I don't know what happens.
Yeah.
I'm going to be interested to see how this shakes out. So, anything else you have to say about Syria?
I mean, I think, it's just something to keep an eye on. And I think, a lot of us are sitting here and, I only really heard about it because it was in the news a bit and, you were talking about it. Some other people in CR were talking about it. You kind of just get talking. I think it's easy to be like, oh, this doesn't impact us. But it is kind of, a major event within our nation or within our world that will impact our nation. And I think that we should keep an eye on it, should stay informed.
Yeah.
Even if it's just at a basic level. So definitely don't just neglect this, but I also think don't get too freaked out yet.
Totally agree. Yeah. Just got to wait and see.
Yeah. And I think Trump taking office will have a big impact on all this.
Definitely. All right. Well, thanks for listening to Right on Campus. We post this podcast weekly where we tackle current events and life as a conservative on campus. If you'd like to learn more about UWEC College Republicans, join our meetings on Monday nights in Centennial 1704 at 7 p.m. As a reminder, we will not be having any more meetings for the rest of the 2024 calendar year. But please join us back at our first meeting on January 27th. Follow us on Instagram and Facebook at UWEC College Republicans. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe if you're watching on YouTube. Favorite and share if you are watching on Spotify. At the beginning of this podcast, we said that we would be covering the military draft. We're going to snip it, and we will be covering it as a bonus episode. So keep your eye out for that. Awesome. We will see you in the next coming days for the military draft episode. Have a great night. Thank you for listening to Right on Campus. We post this podcast once a week where we talk about current events and life as a conservative on campus. Follow us on Instagram and Facebook at UWEC College Republican. Have a great night and see you next time.